Greetings again everyone. Now anyone who's a fan of this channel will know that I have a special place in my heart for extremely wide angle lenses. One of my very favourites was the Laowa 10 to 18mm full frame optic with its unbelievable widest angle of 10mm, which is gapingly extensive on a full frame camera while still having a useful zoom ability for when you don't need such an extreme field of view. Well, this new lens from Canon promises to offer all of that, plus a longer zoom range, plus autofocus, plus image stabilization, plus a brighter maximum aperture of f4, and with apparently excellent image quality, none of which that cheaper manual focus lens from 6 years ago managed to enjoy. This is the Canon RF 10 to 20mm f4 L IS STM, which is only for their full-frame mirrorless EOS R system cameras. This could be the single most exciting and enjoyable ultra-wide-angle zoom lens ever conceived, although at a price of £2,500 here in the UK or $2,300 before sales tax, you will certainly need deep pockets to enjoy it. I'd like to thank Canon UK for loaning me this lens for a couple of weeks for testing, although as usual this is a totally independent review. Let's get a sense of how ridiculously wide this lens can get on a full-frame camera. Most ultra-wide zoom lenses start at about 16mm on full frame. Well, here we go zooming out from there to 10mm. This is a simply astonishing field of view, excellent for architecture and indoor photography. Here it is again, 16mm back to 10mm, so that's great for landscape photography. Also, being able to zoom into 20mm is just the icing on a cake, making this lens wonderfully flexible. 10 to 20mm is even an impressive ultra-wide-angle zoom range on APS-C cameras, but it's on full frame that this lens will truly shine. The lens's build quality is absolutely fine here. It's a little bigger than I first thought it would be, but being mostly made of high quality plastic and at 570 grams or about 1¼ pounds, it's a little lighter in the hand than I was expecting. It's not too heavy at all. The rear mount is made of metal with a weather sealing gasket and space for a gel ND filter. That's the only kind of filter possible you can properly use on this lens. On the side we get a customizable button and switches for autofocus and for image stabilization. Here's some footage at 20mm with stabilization turned off and now turned on. As you can see, when it finally kicks in, it makes a nice little difference to your footage. The camera's zoom ring is rubberized and turns extremely smoothly, useful for video work. The focus ring turns very smoothly also, with great responsiveness from the STM focus motor. At 20mm, the lens displays a little breathing when focusing in and out. Zoom out to 10mm and that breathing turns into distortion warping. At angles as wide as this though, video makers aren't really going to be too worried about focus breathing. The lens's autofocus motor is silent, accurate and blazingly fast, not that it really needs to be though at such wide angles, still impressive. The lens comes with a plastic cap that clips into place pretty securely, thank goodness. Just imagine if you got a scratch on this lens's front element. As I mentioned before, there's no front filter thread here, although it's not impossible that third-party filter companies might come up with some kind of big unwieldy solution for you. The lens also features one of Canon's customizable control rings with gentle clicks to it, something I never really use myself. Overall, excellent build quality though and functionality. Its speedy autofocus and its image stabilization are almost an overbuild from Canon, as neither are strictly necessary on a lens quite this wide, just helpful. Anyway, let's take a look at image quality now. Firstly, on a full frame camera, my 45MP Canon EOS R5. In-camera corrections are turned on for this test. At 10mm and f4, sharpness and contrast are perfect in the middle, looking truly fantastic. The further good news is that fine image quality continues across the whole image frame, although if you look in the very edges, there's a little bit of what seems to be like a digital frazzling on straight lines, perhaps from strong distortion correction. Well, we'll find out in a minute, but overall, this is plenty sharp enough for even quite demanding photographers. The lens stays this sharp down to about f11, where softness from diffraction really makes itself felt, seemingly a little more strongly than usual. Anyway, let's zoom into 20mm now. Sharpness and contrast remain very fine in the middle of the image, straight from f4. The corners are looking excellent too, although the very edges look just a touch softer. Again, image quality basically stays this sharp all the way down to f11. Okay, well, for such an extreme lens design, that's an impressive performance on full frame. There's something slightly odd going on in the corners at 10mm, which I think is due to digital distortion correction, but they're still looking perfectly fine, and anyone getting to play with such ridiculously wide angles isn't going to be complaining really. As I mentioned, 10 to 20mm is an ultra-wide angle on APS-C cameras too, the full-frame equivalent of 16 to 32mm, really handy. So let's see what the lens can do on a tortuous 32.5 megapixel APS-C sensor of my Canon EOS R7 camera. Not many lenses tend to cope well here, but impressively, the 10 to 20 is still looking fabulous in the middle at 10mm and f4. Corner image quality is a bit softer, but still fairly good. It looks the same at f5.6, at f8 or f11, diffraction is kicking in early on the extra high resolution sensor, leaving your images looking much softer, but there's nothing you can do about diffraction, obviously. Okay, let's zoom into 20mm then. Again, even at f4, the middle of the image is looking great. The corners are a little bit softer again, although still quite usable. Stop down to f5.6 or to f8 to see improvements in sharpness, although again, stopping down to f11 just brings about a load of softness from diffraction. Still, a lovely little performance from this lens on APS-C. It's worth remembering just how challenging the R7's sensor really is, a very tough playground for even the sharpest of camera lenses. Okay, well, let's go back to a full-frame camera and check out distortion and vignetting by bypassing Canon's automatic corrections and looking at some raw images. Whoa! It's a disaster zone at 10mm there. Wild barrel distortion and literally black corners mean that you'll have to add major corrections to your raw files. Nasty. This helps to explain the slightly odd-looking picture quality in the corners at 10mm that we saw earlier. Stop down to f5.6 or f8 for the outer portions of the image field to begin to brighten up, but the black edges never do. Zoom into 20mm and we still see just a little barrel distortion with vignetting that gently falls into the image frame at f4. Stop down to f5.6 or f8 to see those corners further brighten up, but that's as bright as the corners get. So this lovely lens has a little secret. Thankfully, that distortion, once corrected, doesn't seem to have too much of an effect on image quality. This lens's minimum focus distance is 25 centimeters, so that's not too bad for getting close to small subjects. The further good news is that, even at f4, the close-up image quality stays as sharp as ever. Let's see how the lens works against bright lights now, and the answer is very well. Contrast remains very high, and although we do catch a few small flecks of flaring, whether zoomed out or zoomed in, they are not especially intrusive. While we're working in the dark, let's take a look for coma and sun stars. Good news here, even at the brightest aperture of f4, coma smearing on bright points of light isn't really evident at all. Well, let's zoom out and look for sun stars then. They only really begin to emerge at f11, and even then only subtly. At f16 and f22 they become much stronger. It's just a shame you have to stop down quite so far in order to see them. And finally, bokeh. Honestly, it's very hard to get out of focus backgrounds with this lens, simply because of its extremely wide angle and only moderate maximum aperture. If you get up very close to your subject though, and zoom in and shoot at f4, then an attractively soft background is your reward. Overall, well, words can't really express how much I loved this camera lens, honestly. There are some funny things going on behind the scenes with its distortion at 10mm, but even on Canon's most challenging cameras, this optic offers plenty of sharpness to go along with those amazingly wide angles, not to mention excellent contrast and high build quality with fast autofocus and other useful features. This thing is amazing, and so useful and versatile too, not to mention just plain fun, so highly recommended. Did you enjoy that video? Well, you weren't really supposed to. It's more of an avant-garde piece, really. But if that's your kind of thing anyway, then check out my channel for about 800 more camera lens reviews, all neatly ordered into handy playlists. And if you really appreciate these videos, then check out my Patreon page down in the description below for more ways to support the channel and get a whole load of exclusive bonus content too. Ciao for now, everyone.